Israel's Defense Forces, or IDF, say they are looking into an incident on Saturday in which soldiers strapped a wounded Palestinian man to the bonnet of a military vehicle during a raid in the occupied West Bank town of Jenin. A video of the man circulated on social media and has led to an international outcry and a renewal of discussions around Israeli treatment of Palestinian detainees. A report by UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, published in March, alleged widespread abuse of prisoners in Israeli detention centers, including beatings, dog attacks, prolonged use of stress positions, and sexual assault. Israel denied the allegations, describing them as Hamas-inspired propaganda.
This is my cousin Mujahid. He was wounded and stayed here for about 2 to 3 hours. We were sitting here and he was wounded in there. They put him on the hood of the Jeep and then we were told that they handed him over to the governmental hospital.
Meanwhile, the Israeli army says its fighter jets have struck a number of Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. It said 2 members of a local security team in northern Israel had been injured, one seriously, by a Hezbollah missile attack. The confrontation between the two sides has been escalating in recent weeks. The Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, will be discussing it during his current visit to Washington. As many as 21,000 children are estimated to be missing in Gaza, according to the international charity Save the Children. The organization says many have become separated from their families during the chaos of the conflict, especially during the latest displacements following the Israeli offensive in Rafah. With more on these stories, I'm joined now on the line from Tel Aviv by Arise special correspondent Carl Bostic. Good to see you, Carl. Let's start with developments over the weekend, with the UN accusing Israel of using a Palestinian man as a human shield following a raid in the West Bank town of Jenin. Israeli soldiers strapped him onto an IDF vehicle in violation of international protocol. What have the Israelis been saying about this?
Well, that's what's interesting, Charles. It's not receiving much attention here in Israel. However, it is being acknowledged. And what's being reported is that the IDF went into Jenin on Saturday. Even though Jenin is in the West Bank and allegedly under control of the Palestinian Authority, it remains one of the centers or hotbeds of militants, ranging from Hamas or Palestinian Jihad. And the IDF is saying that when they went into Jenin, the refugee camp, about 10,000 people, their vehicles were opened fire on, and they responded with fire. In other words, an exchange of gunfire, and they're claiming that one of the attackers was this person who was part of that attack on IDF vehicles. And you heard from the cousin that you just showed a clip from that he was injured or wounded in his torso, and he was, by some accounts, left lying on the road bleeding for a very long time. And at first, initially, it's been reported that instead of transferring him to a local Red Crescent ambulance, the Israelis decided to instead strap him to the hood of their Jeep. Again, the UN rapporteur is saying that this is the kind that, is unacceptable, because basically you're using someone as a human shield in order to get out of this place. In other words, the Israelis strapping him to the hood so that they could then deter anyone from attacking them while they were exiting Jenin, because one of the Jenin civilians or residents or militants was on the hood, and if they attacked the vehicle, they'd be killing him. So it's really kind of cool. But Charles, I've been here for so long, so many months now, and you see this playing out every day. To get one snapshot, Charles, is this: since October 7th, you've had more than 500 Palestinians killed in the West Bank. But back in 2023, the last year reportable data, about 200 were killed. So it's now more than double. What's also interesting is this, Charles, one final West Bank situation. It's not about just these, in and out operations, but now actually are going to be delaying and canceling because they have no more room in their prisons to take them. Their prisons are only built for capacity of about 14,000 detainees. They are now at a capacity of about 21,000. So fewer operations like this, Charles.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you just made there. Good bit of information. But just very briefly, Carl, is there a sense that this instance of using a Palestinian man as a human shield is indicative of something, or is it just an outlying piece of rather bizarre behavior, as somebody described it?
Well, to be unfortunately, Charles, when you read the local accounts here and talking to people here, especially amongst the Palestinians, they're not surprised by this because they're simply saying that this is part of, the course of the conduct, the course of the behavior. That's their rules of engagement. So there's no surprise there at all. I think what's more interesting, is a report came out a week in Charles on the New York Times that the defense minister, Bezalel Smotrich, in a private meeting, in about a 45-minute meeting, said that there was, a strategy to basically take control of all of the West Bank to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state by using civilians in the defense ministry. In other words, to annex more land, to seize more uh, roads, and to build settlements. In other words, about 500,000 settlers there now, Charles. They want to double that, by 2030. So what you saw happening on Saturday, Charles, is really part of a much larger plan, a scheme to maybe undermine the creation of a future Palestinian state.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And what, in terms of the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, I understand there's considerable pressure on the IDF to wrap up its actions in Gaza so that it can move most of its forces north to deal with the bigger threat, which is Hezbollah.
I mean, reading the local Israeli media, one headline saying that the IDF is exhausted in Gaza. They're saying that they've done all they can do, Gaza, in terms of seeing operational control of Gaza within the next 2 weeks or so. Operational control meaning that what happened October 7th can never happen again. The launching of rockets and missiles into southern Israel would never happen on the same scale again, but there will still be Hamas. That's why there's division in the government about whether or not they should continue this Rafah offensive or accept that Hamas will still have a great influence in Gaza. Because also they're saying this, listen, we cannot fight two wars simultaneously. And Hezbollah right now is a much, much bigger threat than Hamas. And we've had ever since October 7th, Charles, these constant cross-border attacks, but they've actually now intensified, they've increased. You've seen those wildfires spreading because after all these missiles are intercepted, the shrapnels, I brush. And what's more worrisome is this, Charles. Um, Hezbollah in the last war in 2006 only had an arsenal of about four Charles. 18 years later, they have an arsenal of 150,000 rockets and missiles. And more worryingly, Charles, it's the drones. The drones are able to evade the Iron Dome system. What's new is that the fact that they showed drone video of Haifa, the third biggest city, the port city of Israel, saying that we know where to strike if we have to hit major targets in Israel like Haifa or even Tel Aviv, where I am. Finally, Charles, it was said by the Israeli government today, the Prime Minister Netanyahu's office, saying that if if Hezbollah decides to try to overwhelm the Iron Dome system, meaning that it can't, intercept all these drones, they will see that as a direct attack from Iran. And that's why the U.S. is so worried about this spiraling out of control.
Indeed, it's not just the US. I mean, I think a lot of people around the world. But are they speaking loudly about the prospect of war with Hezbollah? I mean, the army and the Israeli government?
Well, Charles, again, the tension here is just so palpable. I mean, I've been to the north a few times now. You take public transport like the buses and trains to the north. It's about a 3-hour ride to the north. they're packed with soldiers, men and women. And what the IDF wants to do is they want to, wind down the Gaza operation. That's one reason why the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, is in Washington, D.C. as we speak, Charles, because he wants to talk about a phase three where now it's, occasional in and out in Gaza, but no longer even a ground campaign. But they still want to have the freedom to go in and out of Gaza. We've seen that because they want to redeploy their troops in Gaza to Israel. That's what we're seeing now. Don't forget, Charles, you've got about 60,000 residents from Israel, the northern towns of Israel, still displaced, living in places like Tel Aviv, where I am. One indicator of how they feel about things, that they feel so skeptical, if not pessimistic about things, that they've already registered their children to go to some places like Tel Aviv and other cities and not Kiryat Shmona. In other words, saying that they have no plans to return anywhere north. The mayor of the biggest town, in fact, in an interview, Kiryat Shmona, he said that he was resigned to accept that 40% of his residents will not return to northern Israel, and that's because of this uncertainty. And the people in the north, Charles, they are for Israel going into southern Lebanon to push the Hezbollah forces back. And that's why this could become a wider conflict.
Carl, thanks very much indeed. Carl Bostic is our special correspondent. He was talking to me on the line from Tel Aviv.